Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
It is my understanding that the Office of Budget Responsibility's Economic and Financial Outlook was released on their website before this statement. This is deeply disappointing and a serious error on their part.
That was the UK Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Hello, I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Ewan Potts. Hello and welcome to this Bloomberg UK Budget Podcast special. Now, in 2012, it was the Shambles. In 2022, it was that disastrous mini-budget. Well, maybe this year's budget will become known as the pre-release Shambles after the economic analysis of the budget and all of the headline tax measures were posted online by accident on the OBR's website more than 30 minutes ahead of Rachel Reeves' speech. A chaotic disruption for which the OBR had to swiftly apologise.
Well, in a moment, we're going to bring you reaction to the budget itself from our political editor, Alex Wickham, as well as analysis from Bloomberg opinion writers Marcus Ashworth and Rosa. We'll dig into the numbers in the way that only Bloomberg can do with our UK chief economist, Dan Hanson.
We'll, of course, discuss that unprecedented situation which saw the Chancellor's carefully choreographed speech front-run, leaving markets scrambling to react in just a moment. And Caroline, in terms of announcements, though, made by Rachel Reeves and before that at the OBR, there was a lot, wasn't there? Yeah,
huge number of headlines. So the Chancellor is raising taxes by nearly £30 billion and keeping income tax thresholds frozen for longer. She's lowering the cash portion of ISA tax-free savings allowances, another considerable measure. There'll also be a tax on homes worth more than £2 million from 2028. Then there's the increased tax on dividends, property and savings. Also the removal of the two-child benefit cap for universal credit, which is a type of benefit. There's a mileage tax for electric vehicles. And then there are also changes, a reduction to the benefits that you get from sacrificing some of your salary into pensions. A whole load of different tax changes. Here's the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, just giving her take and some of the measures that she outlined.
This Labour government is changing our country. In the face of challenges on our productivity, I will grow our economy through stability, investment and reform. I've met my fiscal rules and built our economic resilience for the future. I have asked everyone to contribute, yes, for the security of our country and the brightness of its future. But I have kept that contribution as low as possible by reforming our tax system, making it fairer and stronger for the future. I have protected our NHS, maintaining public investment and driving efficiency in government spending. I've taken action on our broken welfare system, rooting out waste and lifting children out of poverty. And I have cut the cost of living with money off bills and prices frozen, all while keeping every single one of our manifesto commitments.
So that was the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The opposition Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, then gave a response after that speech from Rachel Reeves that lasted well over an hour. It was a hard-hitting response calling for the Chancellor to resign.
Well, let's dig into the numbers now. Our UK chief economist, Dan Hanson, has jumped into the studio. Dan, you've had a little bit more time than usual to digest the figures, as have all of us with the OBR's massive blunder. What did you make overall about with the budget and that particularly that extra headroom we've got from the Chancellor?
Well, in of itself, it's good news, isn't it? £22 billion is more than £9.9 billion. So taking at face value, it is good news. I think what I'm looking at and what we've been looking at sort of as we're trying to sort of take on board the OBR document, we were absolutely not ready for that whatsoever. But I think we're sort of back on track now. That a lot of the pain is backloaded. So the tax rises are backloaded. In the near term, there's actually a little fiscal giveaway, which lowers CPI inflation through a fuel duty freeze and freezing energy bills. All of that was pretty much expected, and I think the backloading was probably expected as well. And the question that comes from delaying tax increases or pushing the pain into the latter years of the Parliament, when you're thinking of it from a political perspective, is, will it actually be delivered? And so there's a question, you've got this sort of these two forces weighing on the UK's fiscal credibility in this budget. On the one hand, you've got more headroom. We've all been asking for that, wanting that. The markets have been wanting that. But on the other hand, you've delivered it in a way that doesn't look as credible as it could, say, had you raised, for example, the basic rate of income tax or something like that. So, I mean, just on the point of why we got that leak a couple of weeks ago, it's quite clear now looking at the OBR forecast why. It's because they handed Reeves a much better than expected, I think, fiscal forecast. So the fiscal deterioration was not that large. It was about £6 billion at the end of the forecast, £13 billion if you take into account the policy U-turn. So that is about half what people were expecting. So she has been able to bring this headroom up probably by doing a little bit less than she feared she might, which is why we've had that U-turn on income tax. Yeah.
Taxes overall, though, are going to go up by almost £30 billion. As you say, there will be more leeway for the Chancellor, £22 billion in terms of the fiscal headroom. Growth has been downgraded by the OBR. Inflation a little bit higher. Overall, is it going to end up being a credible budget, one that sticks, one that can be delivered? I know that's quite a big thought in terms of how this budget is going to be digested by investors.
Yeah, so I think let's just put aside the fact that the forecast got published completely at the wrong time. But if you look at the shape of the OBR's forecast now, I would say it looks much more realistic than it did, say, in March or it has done in past forecasts. So that's a tick in the OBR's box. Obviously, the pre-release or the release of it early is a big error, and that'll be the focus. But actually, if you look at the shape of the forecast, they've lowered their growth forecast, they've upped their inflation forecast slightly, and that's due to stronger wage growth. We thought that was going to be the case, that they would do something like that. So all of those things taken together, if I look at their forecast now, and if you look at it relative to the consensus forecast, for example, our React on the terminal has a chart showing this. You know, they're right close to consensus now. They're not outside of basically the band of all external forecasters, right at the top of the range, which is just not the right place to be as a fiscal forecaster. Where the credibility question comes in is the policy response to that. Because, as I say, the fiscal deterioration wasn't quite as bad as first thought. Reeves has been able to do the sort of stealth tax approach, if you like, by delaying the pain. So I think there's probably, on the credibility, as I say, setting aside the early release of the forecast, on the credibility front, looking at the OBR's forecast, it looks more realistic. That's a big tick. But as I say, there are question marks, I think, at least, about the policy package in terms of, will it actually be delivered with an election on the horizon? Or, you know, August 2029, it's due by then. A lot of these policies will be biting at that point. So there's a real question mark there.
So concerns about the credibility of the numbers. I just want to just ask you about what the situation was like where you're sitting in the newsroom when these numbers came through. how much of a shock was it to you, and how did you deal with it?
Well, the OBR, I said to Anna Edwards on television, as this sort of happened, this has never happened before. The OBR is a very secretive organisation. They're very good at this sort of thing. There's never a leak. We were ready to obviously respond to Reeves's speech rather than the OBR document, which has got so many details in it. So it's a very different sort of test of your mental acumen. The speech sort of delivers high-level numbers, and you can try and piece something together. The OBR document doesn't lie about the numbers because it's all there in black and blue and a little bit of white. So it's it was a bit of a shock. As I said at the start, we feel like we're just about back on track now, but we're going to be, as everyone will be, digesting this afternoon.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if I'm going to say the high level points is probably about as expected. She boosted the headroom, perhaps a little bit more than expected. She lowered CPI inflation in the near term. We thought she'd do that. And she's delayed the pain with the tax measures. And that seems pretty much what the consensus was going into it. And you've seen from the market reaction, it hasn't been huge. So that, and if anything, it's been marginally positive.
Okay, but it was certainly confused, and the Office for Budget Responsibility had to apologise for releasing the data early, well before the Chancellor even stood up. And so that was quite a scramble and some confusion really in markets. Thank you so much, Dan, for being with us. Bloomberg's UK Chief Economist, Dan Hanson, my thanks to you. Now, let's bring in the rest of our top team, our Bloomberg Budget voices, our political editor, Alex Wickham, from Bloomberg Opinion, our UK commentator, Rosa, and last but not least, Marcus Ashworth, who covers European markets for Bloomberg Opinion. Alex Wickham, straight to you. I was reading what you were putting out as we were all watching Chancellor Rachel Reeves. You talked about it being chaotic at the beginning with the release of the OBR figures early. What did you make overall of the budget?
Yeah, it's always a nightmare when you're in pret-a-manger getting your lunch and your editor rings you and says, get back to your desk immediately. That was one of those things. I mean, look, there are some winners from this budget. It may be enough to get Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer through the day, through the week, which is their main ask at the minute. That's how badly things have been going for them. There is that higher than expected headroom, 22 billion, which so far seems to have kept markets largely calm. There is stuff in there for Labour MPs to wave their papers in the Commons chamber in delight over things like removing the two-child benefit cap, lifting hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. There are wins for pensioners with the state pension going up, for low earners with the minimum wage going up. Those are Labour policies that will keep Labour's core vote happy. But there is so much bad news in there that will, over the coming days, leave investors and Labour MPs and voters all wondering about the future for Britain, really, when you see living standards rising more slowly than expected. That's not good news when raising living standards are the core aim of this government, along with economic growth, which is downgraded, the tax burden hitting an all-time high as the welfare bill still soars. There are lots of painful things in this budget that will make people doubt over the coming days and weeks whether this government has the right plan and strategy for the future.
Rosie, I want to ask you to dig into some of the detail of this, because we've had so many kites flown. It kind of feels like every kite in the kite shop was sort of released over the last few months. Just tell us, were there any nasty surprises? Was there anything we weren't expecting in this budget? What do you think will the political narrative be over the coming weeks as we digest this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure over the next hours and days, people will be going through the figures and finding out if there are any sort of niche surprises. But I think it's more, rather than sort of the little surprises, I think it's more the kind of bald fact which faces you when you actually look at the overall budget of the tax burden going up. I mean, we are now on a trajectory where we're at 38%. Really high, historically high levels, and I think that, as Alex said, that's something which we'll move on from this budget. We'll kind of, to some extent, forget about all the chaos and the drama, but that will be something that day in, day out will be felt in voters' pockets. And as they think about spring elections coming up, further down the line, in a few years' time, a general election, I think that will have a lasting impact.
OK, well, the Chancellor saying, I'm asking everyone to make a contribution. That's her view. The opposition leader saying it's time for the Chancellor to resign, that she should go. It did feel very stark. And I think actually some of the issues for the UK that have been so pent up really emerged in this budget, didn't they? Marcus, it's not something that investors were in much doubt about. They know this. How are they going to react to it?
Well, I think short term we might get a relief rally. This is not quite a defeat snatched from the jaws of victory, because the OBR have given her a much nicer, happier layout than she could have had, and certainly she was trailing. Don't know what that was all about, but she'd have known about this by the end of October. So some very strange politics going on. That's the overall level of competence, which initially why gilt yields rose. However, the gilt yield, particularly long end, is falling as it should do. It should fall a lot more. She may not get as big a benefit she could have out of this budget. So long end gilt supply is falling, which is good news, I guess, overall for the influence of that debt interest bill, which is one of the big killers. So I think this isn't as bad as it could have been. A lot of it is backloaded, and this is the real problem. No one's going to quite believe that she is going to raise these taxes. Certainly things like this mansion tax, the salary sacrifice stuff, none of it makes much sense. I don't think it raised very much. And it's a double hit on employers. She's hitting landlords again. She's hitting savers, dividend payments from entrepreneurs. This is anti-growth. And that's where the downgrade of OBR's growth forecast is worrying, and an upgrade in their inflation forecast. They're only 0.3 reduction in CPI. Will that give Governor Andrew Bailey a chance to cut in December? Marginal. I think she should have been a bit more aggressive on the inflation to get that Bank of England rate cut, possibly another one again in February, get the debt interest bill down. Gilt yields would have loved it. So she could have done better, but she could have done also a lot worse.
Alex, I want to ask you about the thing which got the biggest cheer from the Chancellor. One of the biggest spending commitments, probably the biggest spending commitment, was scrapping the two-child cap. Now, Kemi Badenoch was pretty robust on this. She says it was a budget for benefits streets. She says hiking taxes to pay for welfare. I just wonder, clearly this has pleased Labour backbenchers, but it doesn't affect many people. It's a lot of money for people who are on benefits, some of whom are working, in fairness. How is this going to go down politically? Is there a danger to this that it may actually end up being a political loser rather than a political winner?
Yeah, and, I just want to read you this really quite astonishing statistic that over the next 5 years, the OBR is forecasting welfare spending in Britain will rise by £73 billion to £406 billion. And, it is a question, as Kemi Badenoch was making out there, a question of what does Labour want this country to look like? Does it want it to be a pro-growth, boosting productivity, competitive country, as she made out in the election and has done at every opportunity up until she came under extreme political pressure from her own party? Or does it want it to be a high tax country with a large welfare state, and more typically in the Labour mould? And what Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves appear to have done is thrown off some of those pro-growth, growth being the number one mission, living, all of that stuff that they used to say, towards a more typical Labour, slate of policies that may please the party. But you have to wonder, why have they done that? Have they done it because the public finances are in much of a better state? Well, I think it's mainly about politics, isn't it? They saw the danger that they were facing, and they basically, to be blunt, tilted to the left. And again, that may be something that investors look at with scepticism. Is it even enough to get Labour MPs on side? Well, they might decide that if that's the direction that they want to go in, why don't they get somebody who sort of really believes that stuff in to do the job?
Rosa, in terms of then the flip side of that, the kind of idea of soaking the rich, of the wealth tax, of the tax on mansions, there is a question mark about whether these constitute wealth taxes and what level, what gradation of rich individual or rich business person they're going to hit, and whether that has political consequences or not. What's your thinking about middle classes versus wealth taxes? Because again, that's also going to be quite a big takeaway for voters, I think, surely, when they look at this budget.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask voters, they all say, yeah, we want to tax the rich. When you look at the receipts of what that actually means, it's less clear that brings in enough to make a difference. And also, as we've written about often at Bloomberg, the impact of the very wealthy leaving the country, taking their money out of Britain. And I think the message was got through to Rachel Reeves in the run-up to the budgets that it risked sort of tipping over. There had been a lot of speculation that there would be some kind of banking tax, which didn't come to fruition. She actually sort of caused some smiles because apparently she was going around saying, or the Treasury was to the banks, well, you need to say this is a really good budget to make up for the fact that I'm not taxing you. So, I think both on wealth taxes and on the two-child poverty limit, it's kind of a sign of her weakness that she's being directed on both of these huge issues by her own backbenchers, and not a very healthy sign going forward.
Now, Marcus, how significant is the backloading? Backloading doing a lot of heavy lifting. I seem to remember criticism of Jeremy Hunt for this and other chancellors. But the OBR says that borrowing over the next 3 years is actually going to increase by £21 billion over the next 3 years. It's only when the threshold freezes come in after 2028 the borrowing actually starts to fall. What do you think markets will be making of that backloading?
Well, it's in some senses they're not hitting growth as hard earlier. They're backloading that, so it's one for the other. So I think the real worry here is, as Alex has pointed out, is that whether this falls apart on the fact that this is a classic socialist tax and spend budget, and whether or not the markets feel that this is ruinous for growth longer run. There are some nasty things about quite how much QE is going to cost. That could be a nasty thing. It comes back out, adding extra sort of 30 billion on the cost of QE, 21 billion per year going basically to the Bank of England. So this could fall apart. I'm not saying it's going to, but there is a serious risk at some point that the markets will go, do you know what? This is not a competent economic package which will deliver growth sustainably. And that the fact that the numbers only add up by a lot of backloaded stuff in 28, 29, 30, which may not ever come about. We don't believe the numbers. We can see the welfare spending coming right here, right now. And that's the risk, really, whether or not they can get it through.
And whether that happens in 3 days or 3 months depends on the budget. We've seen different things happen with different budgets about how long it takes investors to digest that.
Gilt market should be loving this. It's quite liking it, but it should be absolutely loving it. You should see the gilt curve flatten. You should be expecting rate cuts coming for sure. We're not getting that confidence yet, but so we'll see what the final vote is. But, at the moment, stock market likes it. I think everyone wants the Santa rally, so maybe she'll get away with it.
Alex, is Rachel Reeves more or less in danger post-budget?
I think, look, there was a lot of noise over the last few weeks about Keir Starmer's position and Rachel Reeves' position, and a lot of that noise came from Number 10 because they were going around telling everybody, Keir Starmer's going to fight down any leadership challenge and, daring his opponents out of the woodwork, all of that stuff. I think it is hard to see how immediately there is a threat to either Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer. As we've been talking about, so far, caveat that, so far the markets are okay. That's the main hurdle to clear is no adverse market reaction. See what happens over the coming days. Is there a tax rise or spending change that goes wrong and emerges as can happen, as we've seen happen with previous budgets, that comes out over the next 24 hours, which suddenly everybody gets very upset about? Potentially. There were so many tax rises in there, it is quite possible that one of them looks worse than first thought in the small print and becomes controversial. But if I had to bet right now, I would still err on the side of we are probably going to still have Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in post in the coming days, weeks and months ahead.
Thanks, Alex. Right, I'm going to put you all on the spot with a quick fire. I want to give you marks out of 10 for the Chancellor's budget. Marcus?
Oh, please come to me last. I'm going to have to give her a 6.5 because I think it compared to what we were expecting, it's a lot better than perhaps it could have been. I think delivery from start to finish was terrible, so I can't give her anything close to higher marks than that. But I think overall she's going to get away with it. Agreeing with Alex, I think she stays in power for a bit longer.
Rosa?
Yeah, I'm in that same territory. I'd say about a 6, mainly because it was kind of, so in a funny way, the actual budget was sort of drama-free. It was everything that surrounded it that I'm into minus figures with.
Minus, I know. We should have separated it out, really, the actual fact and the delivery. But Alex, overall budget score?
I'm afraid I can't give it more than a 5. Look, she's got through, looks like she's got through the day, weeks, months ahead. But really, should we not want a bit more from our government than that? Should we not want more of a plan and a strategy for the economy and for the country rather than survival? I'm not long ago, people in the government were briefing me about how they wanted to do a big, bold budget that was going to, really shake up the tax code and, make some big changes that made the country better and gave markets a lot of confidence going forward about the public finances, all this sort of stuff that sounded quite good. They obviously decided instead to do this smorgasbord approach out of political desperation. Yeah, maybe enough to get them through, but not much more than that.
So a budget to get by. Certainly the markets seem to have accepted the budget, if not, you couldn't quite say they've embraced it. That's our top team of Bloomberg Budget Voices, Alex Wickham, our political editor, and from Bloomberg Opinion, our UK commentator Rosa Prince, and Marcus Ashworth, who covers European markets for Bloomberg Opinion.
Yeah, it was a real day where, dropped sandwiches, a massive rush as we got the data, the OBR package landing early before the Chancellor had stood up. It was a surprise. Let's see, though, how voters and investors actually think about this over the next few days. That was our special Bloomberg coverage on the UK budget. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Ewan Potts. This is Bloomberg.